Totani at the University of Tokyo suggests there is a reason to believe life may exist elsewhere in the universe beyond our observable neighborhood, as he calls it. He says there are certain combinations of both biological and cosmological models that suggest the building blocks of life could spontaneously form, a process called abiogenesis.
About pace of progress, I'm definitely, going to be dead before we go to Mars. The whole purpose of SpaceX is really to help make life multiplanetary. Well, we're building a production line. Production line is the hard part. Making one of something is well, at this point, frankly, designing rockets is not that hard. Especially if it's an expendable rocket, it's not really a hard problem. You can literally read books that'll tell you exactly how to do it. The hard part is now actually building that thing even once is hard. And then building a production line is 1,000% harder.
When Jack Dorsey, the founder and CEO of Twitter and Square, told people he was moving to Africa for a few months in 2020, it raised some eyebrows in Silicon Valley. After all, tech companies have consistently looked to China and India when they talked about reaching vast, untapped populations who are slowly coming online and needing smartphones, cloud computing, and mobile payment infrastructure. But it turns out in 2020, that sounds a lot more like Africa rather than China or India. For years, it was known derogatively as the Dark Continent, while colonialism and general ignorance about Africa's people skewed perceptions. Even today, if you listen to American media cover Africa, you mostly hear about famine, Ebola, and violence from militant groups. And while countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have had to deal with a recent spate of extremist violence, Africa is a big continent, and much of it is open for business. Today, Africa has more than 600 active technology hubs, organizations with a local address, facilities, and support for tech and digital entrepreneurs. That's up from 442 in 2018. Big tech companies from the US have noticed and are beginning to focus more and more on Africa as the next big market.
Ladies and gentlemen, President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin.
Пользовался очень большим доверием во всем мире. Это почти единственная была универсальная валюта мировая. Зачем-то Соединенные Штаты начали использовать долларовые расчеты как инструмент политической борьбы. Вводить ограничения на использование доллара. Своими руками начали пилить сук, на котором сидят. Но скоро они грохнутся. Доллары сокращаются как резервная валюта во многих государствах мира. Иран ограничивает долларовых расчетах, но Россия вводит какие-то ограничения.
Is the statement from the Russian president simply propaganda? No. The time will come when the US dollar will collapse and be worth no more than the scrap and/or collection value of its cotton paper and dross coins. Russia never wanted to turn away from the US dollar, but Putin explained that Washington's actions have already forced many countries, including US allies, to reconsider the greenback as a reserve currency, while dollar settlements have already slid from 50% to 45%. Putin isn't wrong. He's stating something that we already know. All fiat currency eventually becomes worthless. That's a fact. Vladimir Putin succinctly summarized the shifting tectonic plates of geopolitics. First, he explained the status quo. The dollar enjoyed great trust around the world, but for some reason, it is now being used as a political weapon to impose restrictions. Then Putin explained the consequences. Many countries are now turning away from the dollar as a reserve currency. And ultimately what happens? The US dollar will collapse soon. And just like that, it was gone. Remember, nothing lasts forever. As Bloomberg reports, Russia's central bank has been the largest buyer of gold in the past few years. Of course, Vladimir Putin is not the first and won't be the last to suggest the end is near for the dollar. Warren Buffett once explained that for 240 years it's been a terrible mistake to bet against America, and now is no time to start. The following charts suggest time is ticking as the world transitions from dollars to non-fiat reserves. We are coming to a period I call the global currency reset. Basically, global currency reset refers to a process where the US dollar will eventually lose its place as the global currency. Instead, gold or some other instrument will be used as the new standard. The day is approaching when people are going to wake up en masse with the inevitable economic collapse of the financial world. Those accustomed to living off government spending are either directly or indirectly going to be in trouble, resulting from the fact that, unfortunately, a good number of the more than 7 billion human beings on the planet will feel pain or even suffer death. The world debt is documented in bonds, which are contracts that promise payment of a debt. With regard to the wealthy that hold large quantities of bonds, when the crash arrives, their bonds will become worthless pieces of paper. And that is the nasty surprise that is coming for the wealthy. Currencies of all nations will revalue based on the value of their assets. This is expected to cause a sharp rise in gold prices as people seek out the financial stability provided by the yellow metal. However, the absolute deadlines for Federal Reserve have been surpassed. They didn't come up with quadrillions in gold for debt repayment to keep their fiat global monetary system.
Canada catches a cold, so it stands to reason that when the U.S. Federal Reserve lowered interest rates to rescue the stock market, Canada then made its own very similar move.
Canadian policymakers are saying that it's a part of a global response to the coronavirus crisis. With all indicators pointing to the softening of economies around the world, the Bank of Canada has lowered its interest rate by half a point, from 1.75% to 1.25%. A 50 basis point cut is a first for the Bank of Canada since the 2008-2009 recession. The bank's governor, Stephen Poloz, has resisted lowering borrowing costs, but the reality that the coronavirus could spark a worldwide economic slowdown prompted him to act. The virus has already sharply decreased economic activity in some regions of the world, as well as disrupting supply chains and pulling down commodity prices. In response to the coronavirus's effect on the country's economy, Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said there will be an impact and we're there to try to find solutions together with companies and communities. However, several domestic factors have also influenced the decision of the bank to make a notable interest rate cut. Rail blockades continue in Canada in protest of a new pipeline. Teachers are striking in the country's most populous province, Ontario. Winter storms have slowed things down. And business investment has been less than expected. So far, the lowering of the interest rate has shown positive and negative results. Bond yields plunged to a record low, while the Canadian dollar took a hit. On the upside, stocks got a bit of a boost. The Bank of Canada's Governing Council has made it clear that it is prepared to adjust monetary policy even further in order to protect the economy. Some economists say that more rate cuts are a likely scenario for Canada's central bank.
Africa is home to 54 countries and a population of more than 1.3 billion people. And according to the UN's World Population Prospects of 2019, that's expected to explode to 4.3 billion by the start of the next century. The African population also remains young, very young. The median age in 2020 is projected to be under 20 years old. In 2019, 6 of the top 15 fastest growing economies in the world were projected to be in Africa, according to Focus Economics. The list includes Ethiopia at 1, Rwanda at 2, the Ivory Coast at 5, Tanzania at 10, Senegal at 12, and Ghana at 15. African startups last year raised $2.02 billion in equity funding. That's a new milestone, according to global investing firm Partech Africa's 2019 report on VC funding for African startups. Ben Lynette is a venture capitalist in San Francisco. His company, Lynette Capital, invests in African startups. One of Lynette's investments is in Flutterwave, which provides payment solutions for companies like Uber.
I'm really optimistic from a general standpoint that tech-enabled startups can be the driving force that has historically been lacking at building a lot of this basic infrastructure, allowing people to get into the middle class.
Last year, the African Continental Free Trade Area was formed with the goal of creating a single market on the continent and dealing with the ongoing issues like infrastructure and bureaucracy. The agreement couldn't have come at a better time, since many believe the continent is poised to take off.
Enough money to live while they're getting higher taxes, costing more for everyday living, so they've had it, and this is extremely important. All these movements don't have leaders. Whether it's Hong Kong, whether it's Spain, whether it's Lebanon, what's going on in Iraq with the massive demonstrations, Ecuador, Chile, Bolivia, Colombia, one after another. No leaders because the people feel it. And this is part of the Greatest Depression. When we say it's going to get worse, when the Great Depression hit, there were 2 billion people on the planet. We've added 5.5 billion more. They're living in poverty, violence all around them, corruption. So this thing is exploding. In some ways, we sympathize with Neel Kashkari's concern about the unprecedented wealth inequality that has emerged in the U.S. in recent years, and which has resulted in a slow, methodical, and relentless destruction of the U.S. middle class. Or rather make that precedented, because there was another time when the top 0.1% had amassed as much wealth, and it was just before the Great Depression. After all, who hasn't seen the charts, such as these, showing the tremendous divergence in earned income by America's top 1% at the expense of the middle and lower classes, or that the top 10% now own 70% of all U.S. wealth, the same as the middle and lower classes combined, up 10% from the 60% of wealth they controlled at the start of the century. Yet we find Kashkari's jaw-dropping, virtue-signaling proposal to grant the Fed wealth redistribution power not only laughable, but absolutely terrifying. After all, it was the Fed's ZIRP and QE that was behind the greatest wealth redistribution in the past decade. A redistribution that started almost 50 years ago, when Nixon decided to end the Fed's biggest nemesis, the U.S. gold standard, launching an unprecedented increase in income growth for the top 1%, even as the income of the bottom 90% has remained unchanged ever since 1971. For those confused, Rabobank's Michael Every put it best. Of course the Fed can redistribute wealth, but that redistribution has been from the poor and middle class to the rich, not the other way around. To be sure, the issue of wealth and income inequality is shaping up as the most sensitive topic, not only during the Democratic primary race, but the entire 2020 presidential race, with one of the most salient questions emerging: who can tax the richest the most? Unfortunately, as we are now about to show, it may already be too late to fix the U.S. As the following stunning chart shows, the U.S. is already effectively a banana republic if one defines such a nation as one which has a small but ultra-powerful and unaccountable kleptocracy which gets richer year after year by stealing from the rapidly shrinking middle class. Here's the problem. While the U.S. has one of the highest median incomes in the entire world, with only 3 countries boasting a higher income, it's who gets to collect this money that is the major problem. Because as the chart shows, it's just a 50% share of the population in middle-income households. The U.S. is now in the same category as banana republics such as China and Russia. What is just as stunning, according to the OECD, more than half of the countries in question have a more vibrant middle class than the U.S. So the next time someone abuses the popular phrase, "They hate us for our fill in the blank," perhaps it's time to counter that. They may not hate us at all, but rather are making fun of what has slowly but surely become the world's biggest banana republic. And it has not Russia, nor China, nor any other enemy, foreign or domestic, to blame, except for one: the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States. If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around the banks will deprive the people of all the property until their children wake up. Where did the whole global currency reset idea come from? Do you know about NESARA? I bet you don't. NESARA is the National Economic Security and Reformation Act. It was to be announced the morning of September 11th, 2001. Yep, it's true. If I got your attention now. William Jefferson Clinton signed NESARA into law October 10th, 2000, and it was to be enacted the morning of September 11th, 2001. NESARA provides major financial benefits to American citizens, including 1. End of income taxes, 2. Forgiveness of credit card and mortgage debt as a remedy for bank fraud, 3. U.S. Treasury bank system, which absorbs the Federal Reserve and new precious metals backed by U.S. Treasury currency, 4. Restoration of constitutional law, and much more. Once again, William Jefferson Clinton signed NESARA into law October 10, 2000, and it was to be announced the morning of September 11, 2001. It's a fact. NESARA is law and is simply not being enforced. Recently, there's been so much news about the global currency reset being imminent, which is really exciting news for anyone who follows the news about it for years. However, this is also one of the most complex topics regarding the mass awakening globally. In order to make this topic clear, I'll provide explanation for some basic terms and show you how the global currency reset is also connected to our financial liberation from the current debt slavery financial system. I'll upload this NESARA video to Patreon. To all my patrons and supporters, I'll give you some exclusive content. You will also be able to watch the Global Currency Reset, Episode 1, and Deutsche Bank videos that have been deleted due to complaints. This gift is for everybody who will support me on Patreon until the end of December. This is the closest any sitting U.S. president has come to publicly declaring bankruptcy. Other Trump statements and actions all point to some existential financial crisis. However, it's almost as though Trump is out to destroy capitalism. While that may sound crazy, he's doing all the things that capitalism's ultimate foe said would result in its downfall. As Vladimir Lenin once said, the best way to destroy the capitalist system is to debauch the currency, subject it to unsustainable levels of government debt, then increase the money supply such that the value of the currency drops sharply. If President Trump wants to be reelected, there is no other way out than to make gold money again. Most people don't realize that they need to own gold. Gold is severely undervalued relative to where it should be because too many people have too much confidence in central banks and fiat money. They don't realize they need to own gold. We're not sure when the global reset will happen, but what will be the trigger, i.e. a corporate debt time bomb that could crash the global economy? Almost $19 trillion of debt is owed by companies that don't earn enough to cover the interest payments. We are absolutely sure the reset will happen and gold will play a very important role in the transition to a new world currency. The day is approaching with inevitable economic collapse and stock market crash. Do your part by sharing this video with everyone you know who you feel may be concerned about our freedoms and a sound future for their children and grandchildren.